The Boxcar Children, Book Number 8, The Lighthouse Mystery, by Gertrude Warren. When the Aldens take a summer trip to the New England coast, they have a fun place to stay, a lighthouse. But strange things happen after it gets dark. An unknown woman is seen walking around, and Watch, the Alden's dog, wakes up growling late at night. Can the Boxcar Children shed light on a seaside mystery? Chapter 1, Lighthouse for Sale. The visit to Aunt Jane came to an end. Now, after so many years, Aunt Jane was married to Andy Bean. Nobody called her Mrs. Bean. This pleased her very much. Everyone called her Mrs. Andy, and that pleased Andy. Grandfather Alden called his 4 grandchildren to him and said, "I think we should go home now. Aunt Jane and Andy want to go on a wedding trip." "I wonder where," said Benny. "I bet they are going around the world." Andy told Aunt Jane that she would never have a dull moment. Henry laughed. "I can believe that," he said. "Andy is never still." Violet said, "Aunt Jane looks so young and well, doesn't she, Jessie?" "Yes," Jessie agreed. "Ever since Uncle Andy came home, she has been very happy." "I agree with you, Grandfather. I think we ought to go. We don't want to stay on the farm without Aunt Jane." So they packed their bags to go home. Aunt Jane helped Jessie make a picnic lunch. All the goodbyes were said, and Henry started the car. "Here we go," Benny cried. And so they started for home. At least, that was what they planned. Henry said, "Let's have a change and go home by the beach road." Henry drove the station wagon down the beach road. They could see the ocean most of the way. After about an hour, Benny said, "I'm hungry." "You are always hungry," said Grandfather. "Wait till we come to the lighthouse in Conley. There's a little store there. We could buy some milk. We have enough sandwiches to last 2 meals, ham and chicken. Aunt Jane's makes delightful sandwiches." "Let's go out and see the lighthouse," said Benny. "Maybe the lighthouse keeper would show us the little porch on the top floor." "Maybe he would, old fellow," said Henry, laughing. "That is called a lookout, not a porch. But it is a long climb to the top of a lighthouse." Soon they saw the lighthouse in the distance. It was white. There was a little white house near the foot of the lighthouse, with a little path between. The 2 buildings stood on a rocky point of land, almost in the water. "Look!" cried Violet. "There's a sign on it. What does it say?" "I can't read it yet," said Mr. Alden. "I can," said Henry. "It says for sale." "A lighthouse? For sale?" asked Jessie. "I didn't know anyone ever sold lighthouses. I thought they belonged to the government." "To the Coast Guard," said Mr. Alden. "But I have heard of many lighthouses being sold. Radar is used to keep ships safe now." "Oh, what a wonderful house that would be to live in, Grandfather," said Benny. "See, there is a window on each floor. You could sleep on the first floor, and then you wouldn't have to do any climbing. The girls could have the next floor, and Henry the next, and I could have the top floor with that little porch. I mean lookout. That would be neat." Mr. Alden laughed. He said, "Are you saying you want to buy the lighthouse?" "Oh, absolutely," said Benny. "Really?" said Jessie. "We could have a lovely time in the lighthouse, Grandfather. We could go swimming any time right in our own yard. And we could pick up shells and study the water birds," said Violet quietly. "We could go fishing," added Henry. They had come to the lighthouse by this time. Henry stopped the car, and they all looked at the place. Nobody said a word. They were all waiting for Grandfather to make up his mind. At least, he said, "Come on, children. We'll go into the little store and ask some questions." "Maybe we could use a lighthouse." "Hooray!" Benny shouted. Everyone else was pleased as Benny. They smiled and looked at each other. "Drive right to the front door," said Mr. Alden. "A storeman always knows everything." It was true. When Mr. Alden said, "What do you know about the lighthouse?" the man laughed and said, "I know everything about the lighthouse. It's not used anymore." "Well, I see it's for sale," said Mr. Alden. "Well, it isn't for sale now," said the man, "because I bought it myself. I haven't had time to take down the sign. I'd like to rent it, though." "Would you?" asked Mr. Alden. "My grandchildren think they would like to spend a few weeks there." "Well, I'd be glad to rent it to you. It's all fixed up for light housekeeping." Benny laughed. "Light housekeeping? In a lighthouse?" he said. "That's a good joke." "Does the little white house go with it?" asked Henry. "Well, no," said the storekeeper. "It ought to, but I wasn't quick enough to buy the house. A man named Cook bought that. He buys houses and sells them. He is going to fix it up and rent someday. But now the windows are broken, as maybe you saw, and they're all boarded up. He never thought anyone would rent the lighthouse." "Won't we need the little house?" asked Jessie. "No, that was the summer kitchen. The winter kitchen in the lighthouse is all right. It has a little bit better gas stove and a refrigerator. There's a good cot on every floor. You could get all your food right here in my store. My name is Hall." "Thought so, Mr. Hall, when I saw the sign at Hall's Grocery," said Mr. Alden. Henry asked, "Could we ever build a fire on the beach for a cookout?" "Yes, you could. There's nothing on that point but sand and water and rocks. No bushes. You'll be careful, I know." Benny said, "Yes, we bury our fires with sand." "Good. Make yourselves at home. Do anything you want. Here's the key if you want to go in and look around." "Well, I do," said Benny. "I want to see the top floor with the porch railing." "Fine," said Grandfather. "You get in the car. I'll settle the rent with Mr. Hall." Henry took the key and drove down to the lighthouse. They could not drive to the front door because the road was too sandy. When Henry unlocked the door, the girls went into the kitchen at once. "Good," said Jessie. "This is a fine little gas stove." Violet said, "The dishes are all different, but we like them different." Benny climbed the winding stairs. Round and round he went. He called, "These rooms are very small, nothing but a cot bed in each one." He stopped to look out each window. He called out, "First floor, this is Grandfather's room." He climbed higher. "Second floor, Jessie and Violet. Third floor, Henry. And here's mine." They could hardly hear him. Then they heard no more at all from Benny. He was out on his top window floor, looking out to sea. Grandfather said, "It's lucky there's a window on every floor. It will be hot in here." "Maybe not too hot," said Violet. "We are right by the sea breeze." By the time the beds were made, everyone was tired. "Let's go to bed," said Mr. Alden. "Go to bed at 8 o'clock?" cried Benny. "But I guess my bed will feel nice after all." Everyone was soon asleep. No one heard the clock strike. But by the time it struck 9, and then 10, 11, as it struck 12, Watch sat up and began to bark. Chapter 2: Unfriendly Characters. Watch always slept at the foot of Jessie's bed. "Keep still, Watch," said Jessie. You'll wake everybody up." But Watch didn't stop. He barked all the more. His hair stood up straight around his neck. Benny came down the stairs. Henry came. Mr. Alden called, "What's the matter with Watch, Jessie?" "I don't know, Grandfather," called Jessie. "He must hear something he doesn't like." Benny began to pat the dog. "What's the matter with you, Watch? Why do you have to bark at 12 o'clock midnight? Why couldn't you bark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Then we could do something about it." Watch barked on and on. He stopped just long enough to growl. Suddenly Benny said, "I smell steak and mashed potatoes." "Benny, mashed potatoes don't smell," said Violet. "I can smell them," said Benny. "Are you sure it's not baked potatoes you smell?" asked Henry. "I don't smell anything." "No, baked potatoes smell even better. Maybe it's the milk and butter and pepper and salt that I smell." "Well, maybe pepper, Benny. Certainly not salt," said Jessie. Henry frowned. "Maybe someone is hiding and eating in that little house at the foot of the lighthouse. But I thought it was empty," he said. Just then, Watch stopped barking. He lay down and put his head on his paws and shut his eyes. Everyone was surprised. "Just look at Watch now," said Jessie. "He doesn't even care anymore. I guess the danger's over, whatever it was." "That's a funny thing," said Benny. He started upstairs. "It's more than funny, Benny," said Henry. "The dog must have heard something." "We'll find out tomorrow," said Mr. Alden. "I'll ask the police." Then everyone went back to bed. Violet thought she could not go back to sleep, but she did. They slept till morning. After a rather poor breakfast, Jessie said, "Well, the first thing is to go to the store and buy some food." "Right," said Grandfather. He missed his morning coffee and toast. No one spoke of the midnight noise. With the sun shining, it seemed as if nothing had happened. As they walked up the street to the grocery store, they saw a middle-aged man coming. He had sharp black eyes. He did not even look at the Aldens. He passed Jessie, almost bumping her. "Well," said Benny, when the man had gone by, "he's a queer character." "He did look at us sideways," said Violet. "I saw him when he went far down the street." "But why should he almost bump into Jessie?" asked Henry. "He might have knocked her down if she hadn't moved quickly. A queer character indeed." "I think we noticed everybody now," said Violet. "We think they're all part of our mystery." Everyone suddenly was thinking about the noise in the night. It had been real. "Right," said Henry. He took Violet's arm as they went into the store. "You are always right." There was only one other person in the store. It was a boy, about Henry's age. Under his arm, he had a college book. Henry knew it at once. The girls started to buy groceries, but Henry gave the boy a friendly smile and said, "I noticed your book. Do you go to college?" "I certainly do not," said the boy loudly. Then he went out of the store and banged the door. "Hey, what's the matter with him?" asked Henry. He started after the boy. "He's looking for trouble, that feller," said Benny. His voice sounded just like his grandfather's. Mr. Hall said, "He doesn't have to look for trouble. He's got trouble." "What trouble?" asked Henry. "He looks so cross at everybody." "Well, his father won't let him go to school," said Mr. Hall. "School?" cried Benny. "He wants to go to school, and his father won't let him?" "That's right," said Mr. Hall. Benny said, Didn't that boy go to high school? Oh yes, he did go to high school. It's the law. He's a very smart kid, especially in science. He got through high school at 16. Well, said Henry, he is smart then, but he's looking for trouble. It wouldn't hurt him to be at least polite to a stranger. He isn't polite to anybody, said Mr. Hall. I try to be nice to him, but you see how he acts. He doesn't want friends. Now that's too bad, said Benny. Everyone ought to have friends. I guess it isn't hard for you to make friends, said Mr. Hall. He laughed. No, it isn't, said Benny. I'm lucky. We're all lucky. Henry was quiet. At last he said, I wish we could do something with that father. A boy like that ought to go to college if he wants to. He wants to, all right. That's all he thinks about. College, college. And I guess whatever lives in the sea. He's always picking up shells or bits of seaweed. Now, I say if a boy wants to learn, let him learn. Right, said Benny. There are lots of boys I know that don't want to learn. I don't think you can do anything with his father, Mr. Hall said. You're not the first people who have tried. Then the four Aldens thought of the same name, grandfather. But they did not say it. Grandfather knew how to get things done. That boy is another queer character, said Benny. 2 cross people in 10 minutes. Benny did not see many cross people. Then Mr. Alden said, By the way, Mr. Hall, our dog barked in the night. We feel that someone was prowling about. I thought I'd go to the police today. Mr. Hall shook his head. No police in this town, he said. Never had any trouble here. No police? Said Mr. Alden. I never heard of such a thing. Who looks up a mystery? Nobody, I guess. Never had a mystery either. As the Aldens drove home, they were all thinking. Grandfather said, I suppose I could send for John Carter. Oh, please don't, cried Benny. We want to find out for ourselves. No police, no Mr. Carter, no help at all. Well, very well, said Grandfather with a smile. We'll have to solve the mystery, Ben, said Henry. Maybe we can do it better than Mr. Carter can, said Benny. Oh, said Jessie. Somebody thinks he's a smarty pants, Mr. Benny. But we all know that Mr. Carter is right there. He could come and help us in a minute. When they reached the lighthouse with the groceries, Jessie said, I wonder, just the same, about that black-eyed man and the cross boy. Could one of them have anything to do with our mystery? I don't see how, said Benny, but you never know. Maybe they are cooking something up. Benny didn't know how near he was to the truth. Chapter 3. Cement for a Project. Jessie boiled a dozen eggs and a dozen potatoes. She put them in the refrigerator. By noon, she had made an enormous potato salad. She had bought rolls and butter and a cherry pie. Let's eat lunch out on the rocks, she said. It's too hot in the lighthouse. You carry the salad, Henry. And Benny, you carry the cherry pie and the knife. They found a fine seat for Grandfather that just fitted him. Really, this is an easy chair, he said, made out of rocks. The other seats were not so easy. The rocks were sharp. The table was not very flat either. I have an idea, shouted Benny suddenly. Let's find stones and make 5 easy chairs. Then build up the table with flat stone. And get some cement and fill the cracks. A wonderful idea, Ben, said Henry. A small bag of cement would be enough. We've got plenty of sand. I saw a place where we can get cement, said Violet. Some men were building a driveway. Where? Asked Benny. Well, don't you remember when we came from Aunt Jane's, there was a new gas station where some men were building a driveway? I remember it, said Mr. Alden. It was right beside the little fish market. Let's go the minute lunch is over, said Benny. Lunch is over for me right now, said Mr. Alden. He ate the last of his cherry pie. The ocean will wash away the crumbs. Jessie and Henry picked up all the dishes and washed them in the sea. Then Henry backed the car out, and they all went down to the little fish market. Sure enough, the men were at work on the driveway. Bags of cement were lying around. Where can we buy some of that cement? Asked Henry, stopping the car. He put his head out of the window. How much do you want? Asked the man who was the foreman. Well, we want to make some seats and a table down on the rocks by the lighthouse. How much do you think we need? Take this small bag, said the foreman. Bring back what you don't want. Henry said, Is it 3 parts of sand to 1 part of cement? Right, said the foreman. You can borrow this hoe if you want. That's neat, cried Benny. I'll hoe. Wish I could come and help you, said the man, smiling. He looked at the family, laughing. They all laughed again. Henry lifted the bag into the car, and Benny took the hoe. I'll put the cement on Violet's feet, said Henry. But he wasn't joking. Then the Aldens noticed that one of the men was staring at them with big black eyes. It was the same man who had almost bumped into Jessie. When he saw that they noticed him, the man turned his back and began to do his work again. After they had driven away, Jessie could not help saying, That was odd seeing that man again. Everyone agreed. Stop at the store, Henry. I'll buy a trowel, said Grandfather. You'll have to smooth the cement and carry it to the rocks. When the Aldens got back to the lighthouse, they went to the rocks at once. The only seat which was comfortable already was Mr. Alden's. They walked around trying to find big rocks of the right shape. Benny sat down on every seat he could find to try it out. Then the boys began to carry big stones, and the girls took little ones to fill the cracks. At last they had 5 seats around a fine table. Henry began to mix the cement. Not with salt water, he said. We must have fresh water. He found a big rock that was shaped like a tub. He mixed the cement in that. Now let me hoe it, Henry, begged Benny. I know just how to do it. I watched the men. Don't mix up too much at first, said Jessie. It'll get hard before we can fill all the seats. Isn't this fun? Cried Benny, hoeing away. Just like making mud pies. Let's do Violet's seat first. She has such a comfortable looking chair already. So they carried the cement in a newspaper, and Benny plastered the seat and smoothed it with the trowel. Isn't that wonderful? Said Violet. I'd love to try it. Better not, said Henry. Let's let it dry overnight. Then Jessie and Henry took turns with the trowel, and at last they all helped Benny with his own seat and the table. Let's make places for the cups on the table, said Violet. So, when the cement on the table was soft and smooth, she pressed a cup into it in 5 places. The mark made a wonderful saucer. The cup would not fall off. Plates, too, said Benny. With a stick he drew B for Benny J for Jessie, V for Violet, H for Henry, and G for Grandfather beside the plates. The cement was almost gone, but they took back the bag to the workmen, and Henry paid for what they used. He gave back the hoe. They noticed that the black-eyed man was not there. "I'm glad," said Benny, as they drove back. "I don't like him anyway." "I wonder who he is," said Mr. Alden. It was not long before he found out. Chapter 4. A Midnight Visitor. It was delightful to sit on the beach that evening, even though they could not use their new seats. The family sat there long after supper, watching the sunset. Gulls flew overhead and landed on the rocks nearby. Suddenly, Henry said, "It's queer how sleepy we get." "It's the sea air," said Mr. Alden. "Go to bed any time you want." In fact, the whole family went to bed at 9 o'clock and were asleep very soon after. The Conley Tower clock struck, as it always did, 10, 11, 12, and then Watch began to whine. His hair stood up along his back and around his neck. He began to growl. "No, Watch," said Benny. "If you're going to howl every night at midnight, you might as well go home. You're no help to us." But Watch went right on howling. "I wonder if someone is cooking in that little house," said Henry. "No one's there," said Benny. "We would have heard him go crunch, crunch, crunch on those little stones." "That house is all boarded up anyway," said Jessie. "The door must be locked and the windows don't open. Nobody could be in there." "Someone might have taken off a board to get in the window," said Henry. "Then he could put the board back every night. Tomorrow we'll take a look." Benny wanted to go right down, but just then Watch began to quiet down. He gave a last growl and went to sleep. "You're a funny dog," said Benny. "See that you keep still the rest of the night." But it was not Watch who kept Jessie and Violet awake a little longer. When Jessie turned out her light, she looked out her window. In the moonlight, she saw a woman walking quietly away. Her feet did not go crunch, crunch. She walked softly in the tall beach grass. Jessie called quietly to Violet. She came and looked out too. "A woman!" she whispered. "What do you suppose she is doing here?" "She is going away, at least," answered Jessie. "We certainly don't need to get Benny down again, and Watch is quiet. Look, Violet, she is hiding behind those bushes before she goes up the street." The street was empty. The stores were dark. Very soon, the woman went quietly up the road and out of sight. The two girls went back to bed and fell asleep. About dawn, Watch growled softly, but everyone was sleeping deeply. No one awoke. In the morning, Jessie called everyone to breakfast out on the rocks. "I know my place," said Benny, "on account of the bee." When everything was eaten, the girls told their strange story about the woman. Mr. Alden said, "I think we better look at that little house." Everyone can help. Try each board to see if it's loose. The Aldens began with the front windows and found everything tight. The door was locked. There was no loose window boards. Watch trotted along quietly and did not bark. "That's funny," said Jessie. "That Watch doesn't bark." "Maybe there's nothing for him to bark at now," said Mr. Alden. Certainly this house is shut tight." "Hey, look at this," said Henry suddenly. He caught a sheet of paper that was blowing down to the sand. The paper was marked into little squares. There were numbers and strange letters in each. Sometimes there were question marks. "That doesn't mean a thing to me," said Jessie. "Me either," agreed Henry. "But I think somebody is pretty clever. It looks like college science work, but I don't understand it. It's not my studies so far." "Just as if someone were testing something," said Violet slowly. "Like an experiment." "Exactly," cried Henry. He smiled at his little sister. "But how does it fit in with the cooking smells and seeing a woman at night?" "Keep that paper, Henry," said Mr. Alden, as they went back to the rocks. Just then Violet spoke of the shells. "The beach is covered with them," cried Benny. He jumped off the rocks to the sand. "I know this one. It's a clam shell. And this one is a scallop shell." "Here's a queer one," said Jessie. "It has 5 toes." "Why, that's a cat's paw," said Mr. Alden. "See how many kinds we can find." Mr. Alden knew all about shells, as well as about birds and flowers. They found a snail shell, a slipper shell, a gold and silver-colored shells. In all, they found 14 different kinds. "There's plenty of seaweed here, too," Benny said. "But who would want to collect that? Maybe that cross boy would find it interesting." "This makes me think of Blue Bay," said Violet, smiling. "We ate out of shells there." "But this is safer for swimming than Blue Bay," said Henry. "No sharks here." Jessie said slowly, "It's too bad we don't have swimsuits. I suppose 4 new swimsuits would cost too much." "No," said her grandfather. "You need new ones anyways. And you mustn't go to the beach and not go swimming." "Maybe Mr. Hall has some suits," Jessie went on. "He has almost everything." She smiled to think of suits and groceries and everything else mixed together in that little store. They put their shells on the rock table and walked over to the store. "No," said Mr. Hall, "I haven't any swimsuits. But there is a lady down the street who sells hats. She has suits, too. You'll see the sign as you go out." Benny said, "I saw the sign when we came in. It said hats. And that's where we buy bathing suits? That's funny." "Well," said Mr. Hall with a smile, "my sign says groceries, and people come here to buy paint and wallpaper." They went out of the store and down the street. The dock was nearby, and Benny pulled Henry over to see the boats. "Look at that one," he said. "She's a beauty. Her name's Sea Cook, too." Henry said, "I guess a boat like that isn't too big for one man to run. You're right, Benny. She is a beauty." Just then, Jessie and Violet called to the boys. The girls were more interested in suits than boats. The boys saw Grandfather waiting with the girls. Together, the Aldens looked in the window of the hat shop. There were beautiful summer hats in the window, and one suit. It was blue. "There's your suit, Jessie, if it fits," said Henry. "Of course, Ben, you want red." "Right," said Benny. "Red is my color." The lady in the hat shop smiled to see the whole family coming in. She said her name was Mrs. Ross. Suddenly, Henry looked out of the window. The black-eyed man was going by. "Do you know who that man is?" Henry asked. "Oh, yes, indeed. His name is Tom Cook." "What does he do for a living?" asked Mr. Alden. "He's really a fisherman. but sometimes the fishing is poor, so he works on odd jobs. They say he has made a fortune selling lobsters and renting houses to summer people." "He doesn't look like he does," said Henry. "He looks poor." "He saves his money," said Mrs. Ross. "He won't spend a cent. He has a fine boat. He won't let his son use it, and his son is no little boy. He's 17 years old already." An idea hit Benny, but he didn't say anything aloud. The man was Mr. Cook. That beautiful boat was the sea cook too. It must be the black-eyed man's boat. Henry was thinking too. That first day, when they had met Mr. Hall and rented the lighthouse, hadn't he said a man named Cook had bought the summer kitchen? Maybe here was another clue. "Too bad," said Jessie. "Yes, too bad. The boy does use it, though. People say that he is always taking the boat out after dark. They say he has some fancy idea in his head, but nobody knows what it is. He always comes back carrying something. Sometimes it is a small thing like a jar, and sometimes a great big thing like a barrel. At least, that's what I'm told." "I wonder what it is," said Benny. "I haven't the least idea," said Mrs. Ross. "He goes way out of sight. His father doesn't know that he takes the boat, though how the boy has kept it from him finding out, I don't know." "I bet someday he's going to find out," said Benny. "Then there'll be trouble." "Trouble?" cried Mrs. Ross. "There's enough trouble already in that house between Mr. Cook and his son. The mother stands up for the boy. The father will hardly speak to his son." "Why is that?" asked Mr. Alden. "Well, you see, the boy is very smart. He finished high school at 16. He's been just hanging around ever since. His father won't let him work, too proud. And the boy wants to go away to college. His father won't let him." "Oh my," said Benny. "That's the cross boy we saw in the store. And the cross man with the black eyes is his father. That explains a lot, doesn't it, Grandfather?" "Yes, Benny. Those two will always be in trouble, unless we do something about it." Did you say we?" asked Henry in surprise. "Yes, we," answered Mr. Alden with a smile. Chapter 5. Little House with a Secret. The Aldens went right back to their lighthouse with their new suits. They put them on at once and went to their own little white beach. "Be careful now," said Mr. Alden. "You don't know this beach, and you must find out how deep the water is." "Mr. Hall says it is very deep on the other side of the lighthouse," said Henry, "but it's not over your head on this side. I asked him." "I like it deep," said Benny, swimming away. Every one of the Aldens could swim very well. Henry and Jessie could dive, but this was no place to dive. It was too rocky. The water was cool, but the day was hot. Mr. Alden sat on his own rock chair and watched the swimmers. They threw water and swam underwater. Even Watch swam around, barking for fun. "You bark all you want now, Watch," said Violet, laughing. "Just keep still at midnight tonight." She really had no idea that Watch would bark every single night. That night the family sat up late. It was dark when Benny went climbing up to his top floor. He put on light blue pajamas and went out on his little lookout. He sat down on a beach chair. Benny did not know that he showed up plainly in the moonlight in his light pajamas. He was looking at the stars. They looked very bright here, because there was no streetlights. Then one star moved. Soon Benny knew that it was not a star, but a light on a boat. The boat was coming in. Suddenly the boat stopped and turned around and went out to sea again. Well, well, thought Benny. Whoever he is, he changed his mind. The ideas began to spin around in Benny's head. He remembered what Mrs. Ross in the hat shop had said. He thought about seeing the sea cook at the dock. Then next, he thought, I wonder if he saw me from his boat. I bet he did. I bet it's our cook boy with his father's boat. That boat was certainly a beauty. Benny jumped up and turned out his light. He put on a dark coat and watched out the window. Very soon the boat turned around again and came into the dock not far from the lighthouse. It looked like a man who jumped out, but Benny knew that the cook boy was as big as a man. Benny watched as he bent over his boat. He took out a pail. A pail this time, thought Benny. I do wonder what it is in it. But he didn't find out. The boy looked all around. The whole town had gone to bed. The boy took the pail and disappeared up the street. Benny went to bed. But if he had watched a little longer, he would have seen more. But he was soon asleep. At midnight, Watch began to bark. Oh my, Watch, cried Jessie. I guess you're going to bark every night. But you'll stop in about 10 minutes, so bark away. That is just what the dog did. He barked and howled for 10 minutes, and then he went back to sleep. Violet said, You're just like a baby, Watch. You wake up every night crying. Several hours later, Watch growled softly, but nobody heard. For the next few days, no one was surprised to hear Watch bark during the night. No one got up. They knew Watch would bark for about 10 minutes, and then he would stop. But one morning Henry said, I don't like it, just the same, he frowned. The dog must hear something. The girls said they had seen a woman again, going away very quietly. She had a bag in her hand. Henry said, I'm going to find out why this woman comes here. I'm going to hunt all over this point of land. We'll help you, said Jessie. On the other side of the lighthouse, behind the little summer kitchen, there were enormous rocks. The land went downhill to the water. The young Aldens hunted over every inch of land to find some way to get into the house. They found nothing. Then Henry said, Let's look in those boards nailed over the windows. There must be a crack somewhere. Maybe we can see in. They all looked up at the windows. Do you see that board up high? Asked Jessie, pointing. There's a big crack there, but it's too high to see through. Good for you, Jess, said Henry. I see what you mean. I'm not tall enough, but Benny will be. What do you mean? Asked Violet, laughing a little. You are much taller than Benny. Well, Ben, said Henry, laughing too. I'll bend over and you stand on my back and look through the crack. Oh boy, said Benny. He climbed up on Henry's back like a monkey and stood up. He put his hands around his eyes and peeked in the crack. I can see quite well, said Benny, because there is another big crack in the front door we didn't find. Oh my, somebody does cook here, he shouted. There's a stove and a frying pan on it. There are pails of water on the floor with something brown in the water. There's a little microscope on the table. It's no good though. It's too small. I bet it cost about $3. Then there are a lot of papers with little squares like the one we found. Books and other stuff too. Good, said Jessie in excitement. See if you can tell us what's in the pails. It's seaweed, cried Benny. It's all over the floor, and some is hanging over the edge of the kettle near the stove. What a queer thing, said Violet. I wonder what it all means. Certainly it means that somebody comes here at night and makes the dog bark, said Henry. That woman? asked Jessie. You sound funny, Henry, upside down, said Benny. There are plates and cups on the shelf, and it looks like a bag of flour. Better get down, Ben, said Henry. You're getting heavy. Benny jumped down lightly. There was a one pail under the window. I couldn't see it very well, said Benny, but it looked as if there was something glowing in it. Glowing? asked Henry. What can that be? Wait a minute. Do you remember how we saw something glowing in the water near Blue Bay? It was plankton, I think. I bet it is, said Benny. We saw that under the microscope going to Blue Bay. All tiny fishes and eggs and things you can't see. That's what the microscope is here for, said Henry slowly. To study the plankton and the seaweed. We don't know much more than we did, said Jessie. We just know someone, a woman, comes to work here every night. I suppose it could be just some kind of hobby. But the woman comes at midnight and goes away in 10 minutes, put in Benny. How does that fit in? Nobody can do much in 10 minutes. Henry said, It seems to me there is no danger from someone who studies seaweed. Maybe the person's afraid of something. Isn't it strange, Henry? asked Violet. You said there is a stove there, and we've smelled something cooking at night. Well, I don't know, said Henry, thinking. I have heard that seaweed could be food for cows and horses and pigs, but they won't eat it. It tastes awful. Wait, said Benny. I saw something else. I saw some bags on the shelf. They looked like bags of flour and sugar. There were others with no labels. Now, what do you think of those? asked Violet. Maybe someone's trying to make seaweed taste good, said Jessie, half joking about the thought. Well, let's go. Grandfather may have some ideas. Mr. Alden heard the strange story, and he did have a small idea. I was talking to Mr. Hall about the cook boy, and he says he often sleeps all the morning. Well, said Jessie, you remember Mrs. Ross told us the cook boy takes his father's boat out at night, and that he sleeps in the days. Suddenly Benny said, I'm dumb. I had a clue and I didn't fit it with the others. I was thinking about a woman in the summer kitchen because that's all we have seen. He stopped, but Benny said, Go on. Benny asked, You remember when I thought I saw the cook boy get out of his father's boat and carry a pail away? I thought he went up to the street. I bet if I had watched, I would have seen him come back into the summer kitchen. That cook boy and the woman have something to do with our mystery. Henry said, The paper with the squares that looked like a college experiment could belong to the cook boy. If he is coming around here at night, that explains how we found it. Maybe we ought to put the paper back through the window, Henry, said Benny. The cook boy may need it. No, Ben, said Henry. If we put it back, he will know that someone has been there, and it isn't time yet to tell him. We have to make friends with him first. Then we can tell him we'd like to know more about what he's doing. And how in the world are you going to make friends with that cross boy? I should like to know that, said Benny. He doesn't want friends. He said so. Maybe he did say so, agreed Henry, but I think he does want friends, even if he doesn't know it himself. Chapter 6. well done for Benny. "Let's have a picnic," said Violet, after the Aldens had made as many guesses as they could about what went on in the summer kitchen. "We have a picnic every meal, I should say," said Benny. "We always eat outdoors and on our rocks." "Well, I mean a real picnic," said Violet, "with a fire and hamburgers." "Good for you, Violet," said Henry, smiling. "I'm all for it. I mean a real cookout." "I don't like hamburgers this time. I want frankfurters," said Benny. "You can have 2 if you want, or 3, said Jessie. "And this time, let's get a real fire going. Not be in a hurry. It cooks better when it has burned down." They went to the store and bought long rolls, big sweet pickles, and brownies, as well as the meat. They left Watch outside. Suddenly they heard him bark. "Oh boy," said Benny, "he's barking just like he does at night." They all rushed out and Jessie called, "Stop it, Watch, come here." Then they saw that he was barking at the cook boy. "He won't bite," said Jessie. She smiled at the boy. "He just barks." Watch came to Jessie when she called, but he still growled in his throat. Violet could see that the boy did not like this. "You don't need to be afraid of Watch," she said. "He's a very gentle dog. He would never bite anybody." "I bet he would, though," said the boy, "if anybody tried to hurt you kids." He went quickly down the street, and Watch still growled. No one had time to say anything more to the boy. "Now that is very funny," said Benny. "Watch did bark just exactly as he does at night. I bet that is the cook boy who is going and cooking seaweed." Jessie laughed. "You said once that somebody was cooking up something, and it turned out to be true. It is the cook boy." "I'm sure of it," said Henry quietly. "There aren't very many people in Connolly who would be smart enough or interested enough to make those figures on the squared paper. The question is, what is he trying to do? And how does a woman fit into the puzzle?" "Well, we can't do anything about it now," said Benny. "Let's go on our picnic." "Is this picnic going to be for lunch or supper, Violet?" "Oh, lunch. We couldn't wait for supper. Now, we're all set." The Aldens went down to the beach and picked up some dry sticks of all sizes. Henry and Benny made a fire with stones. They put the sticks in the holes with paper and dried seaweed. "No danger of fire on the sand," said Henry. "We have that whole ocean to put it out." At last the fire burned down to hot coals. It was hard to wait, but they did. Jessie gave Benny a long stick to cook his frankfurter on. He stuck the frankfurter on the end and put it over the fire. He had no sooner done this than the frankfurter slipped off. "Look at your frankfurter, Ben," cried Henry. "It's on fire." "Oh, so it is," cried Benny. He stuck the fork in again and lifted it out. The frankfurter was burning on one side. "I like it burned," he said. He blew out the fire. "But not burned up," said Mr. Alden, laughing. As he spoke, plop went the frankfurter again. "Do you want me to help you, Benny?" asked Jessie, laughing too. "No, indeed, thank you. If I can't cook a frankfurter, I'm a monkey." "Well, I guess you're a monkey then," teased Henry, "'cause there it goes again." Benny picked it up again. "You stay on," he said to the frankfurter. "Watch out, Ben." "Oops, there she goes," cried Henry. He couldn't help but laugh. The poor frankfurter was black all over. This time, just as Benny was putting it on the fork, it slipped off again. Swoosh! "This time, I'll hold my fork the other way," said Benny. His face was red with hot fire. "I guess I can eat my own cooking." He put the frankfurter onto a roll and began to eat it. "Delicious," he said, chewing happily. "Please don't eat it, Ben," Henry begged. "You can have another, and maybe it won't slip off. You can put it on our grill this time." "No," said Benny. "No grill for me. I have to put it on a long fork. That's the way to cook a frankfurter." "What does it taste like, Ben?" asked Henry, laughing. "Coal," said Benny. "Delicious coal." "Maybe charcoal," said Violet. "That's what it really is. I hope you'll try another one, and so you can have a decent lunch." Benny was standing up on a rock, eating brownies. He looked toward the street. There was the cook boy going past. "Hi," shouted Benny. "Hello." The boy did answer. It was a gruff hello. Then he went along. Henry said thoughtfully, "It might be that he's more afraid than cross. Afraid someone will stop his secret work." Benny jumped down. "You know, I think that the cook boy would like to come and eat with us, but he would never do it. I saw his face before he saw me. He looked as if he wished he could come to our picnic." "Very likely you're right," said Mr. Alden. "Maybe you can become friends, little by little." But, as it turned out, something happened suddenly, not little by little. Chapter 7. Baked Beans and Chowder. Henry went to the store to get the paper. He nearly bumped into the cook boy coming out. The angry look on his face kept Henry from trying to say anything. "What's up now?" Henry wondered. Then he forgot about the boy because a sign on the store door said, "Village Supper, July 25th. Henry said to Mr. Hall, "What's this supper on the 25th? Mr. Hall sat down and said, "Oh, every July, this village has a chowder supper outdoors. Everybody in town comes. We have chowder and baked beans, hot rolls and coffee, pies and cakes. It costs $1. "It sounds good," said Henry. "Can anybody come?" "Oh, yes. We want all the money we can get. We are trying to put in street lights. This year, I think we will do it. All the tickets will be sold in one day. Everybody wants to come." "Well, I better get 5 tickets now," said Henry. "My family will all love to come." "Here you are," said Mr. Hall. He gave Henry 5 tickets. "I'll tell you something else, too. You'll be surprised. Guess who makes the chowder and the coffee and baked beans? Larry Cook. You see, he isn't all bad. He does this every year. He loves to cook." "Imagine that," said Henry. "I wouldn't think of it." "No, that Larry Cook is a surprise in many ways." "Well, so he is," said Henry, thinking. "I met him as I came in the store. He seemed crosser than ever." "Yeah, you want to know why?" asked Mr. Hall. "Every year, 2 summer people come to help him. This year they sent word that they can't come. That's why Larry is crosser than ever. He can't do all of this alone, with such a big crowd. Everybody else is busy making pies." "I wonder if we could help him," said Henry. "We would do just as he said. Maybe that would cheer him up." "I'm sure it would. Your family would be a big help." Henry went home with the tickets and the paper and the news. Everyone wanted to help Larry. "I think Mr. Hall will tell him what I said," said Henry. "But if we meet him, we can tell him too." "I heard something new about Larry's father," said Benny. "He is a night watchman sometimes at the shipyard. So, off and on, he is busy all night. Maybe that is why he doesn't know his boat is gone. Later that day, the Aldens walked over to the dock. They met Larry. He went by them with a gruff hello. Benny said, "Wait a minute, Larry. Would you like some help with your supper? We can peel onions and potatoes, and we all know how to get clams out of shells." "Do you?" asked Larry. He almost smiled. "There will sure be a lot of clams. I can't do it alone." "Then can we help?" asked Benny. "Yes, I'd be glad if you helped," said Larry. "Grandfather will help too," said Jessie. "He is fine at getting out clams." "Well, well," said Larry. "I never thought Mr. Alden would be working for me, that's sure. You can come around 9 Saturday morning, and we'll all get to work." Then Saturday morning came. The 5 Aldens went to meet Larry behind the store. There was a big field there, with a place for cooking and a tent for shelter. Other men had set up long tables and chairs. Larry had 5 chairs ready. The Aldens sat and started to peel potatoes. Larry said, "We'll get through this quicker this year with 6 workers. I always had 3 before." When the onions came around, Larry had big pails of water. "Peel the onions underwater," he said. "If you don't, you will cry and not be able to see." It was a fine idea, for there were many onions. Next, Larry and the Aldens got the clams out of their shells. They had piles and piles of clams. "You should see how this crowd can eat," said Larry. "We have to have baked beans, too. Chowder just isn't enough." The beans were all baked ahead of time. Henry said, "Too bad we can't get more food from the ocean." But if Larry heard him, he kept quiet. At 5 o'clock, the people began to come. It certainly looked as if everyone in town was there. Jessie had made paper caps for the family to show they were waiters. Other people helped too. Larry was a different boy. He smiled at everyone. He could hardly believe it when he saw Grandfather waiting on tables in a paper hat. One tall man was a summer visitor, just going through town. He called Benny and said, "Sonny, ask the cook how he made these beans." "He won't tell you," said Benny. "A lot of people want to know. He always says that is my secret. The chowder is his secret too." After the stranger had finished supper, he went out to the kitchen tent to talk to Larry. But he did not learn how the baked beans were made. Larry was very polite and was willing to talk, but he said just what Benny had said. "That is my secret, sir." "They say you like to cook," said the stranger. "Oh yes, ever since I was 14, I have cooked this supper. I love to cook. I like to put things together and see what will happen." "Oh, do you? Do you go to college?" "No," said Larry. He scowled. The man saw the scowl, so he said goodbye to Larry and went down to his car. Nobody else noticed him very much, and nobody knew his name until some time later. Then they were all very surprised. Chapter 8. From the South Seas. "I have an idea for today," said Mr. Alden at breakfast on Monday. "See this paper, Henry? In Ashland, the next town, ships come in from all over the world." "From Blue Bay?" shouted Benny. "Well, you are right," said Grandfather, nodding at Benny. "They do come in from the South Seas. See, there is one coming in today. We might go over to Ashland and see her come in. She sailed from Tahiti, and her name is Tahiti." "Oh boy!" cried Benny. "Maybe the captain will let us go over the ship." Maybe, agreed Grandfather. It will be a beautiful passenger ship, not like the freight liner we went on to Blue Bay. Very posh, said Benny. Yes, I guess that is the word, said Grandfather, smiling. I know the company that owns the ship. Then I guess the captain will let us go on, said Jessie, looking at Violet. Grandfather does know a lot of people. I don't know this captain, but I hear that he is a very good man with a boat. He is young. They washed the dishes and got into the station wagon. Henry backed it out, and they were soon on their way to Ashland. Boats are always late, said Jessie. We may have to wait all day. Right, said Mr. Alden. But there are seats on the wharf, and a roof to keep the sun off. You will enjoy watching the small boats. They keep coming and going. How do you know so much about Ashland? Asked Henry. I never heard of that town. Well, remember, I grew up on Aunt Jane's farm. I have been up here with Mr. Carter a few times. I am interested in that Tahiti boat. Ha ha, I thought so, said Jessie. That's why we're going to see it come in. Mr. Alden laughed. I like to see ships come in anyway, any ship. The Tahiti was late. I told you that boats are always late, said Jessie. They all sat down and watched the small boats. There was one big empty place for the Tahiti. Small boats came in to get gas and water. See that man having his breakfast on the boat, said Jessie. He has bacon and eggs. Now his wife is bringing toast, said Violet. It must be fun to cook and eat on a boat like that. One boat had children climbing all over the deck. Oh, they're going to fall in, cried Violet. I don't think so, replied Grandfather. Those children are used to a boat. The mother heard this. She looked up at Grandfather and laughed. She said, Don't you worry. All these children have been living on a boat since they were born. They can all swim and dive. Everything was interesting, but still the ship did not come in. At last it was time for lunch. We had better get lunch at some place over here, said Mr. Alden. We'll hear the boat whistle if it comes in. It seemed good to eat at a real table again. The Aldens had a good lunch and finished with apple pie. Then they went back to the wharf. She's coming, sir, said a man in uniform. She has passed the point. Good, said Mr. Alden. Thanks for telling me. Many men began to come down to the wharf to help tie the big ship. Soon they saw it coming in the distance. It was pure white. It has 3 big whistles, cried Violet. No, Vi, those are not whistles, said Benny. They are smokestacks. See the smoke? Violet laughed at her mistake. The big ship came nearer and nearer. It was very beautiful. A small boat went out to meet it. Then it slowly came into the empty place at the wharf. People were standing and waving at the rail of the ship. Then Jessie noticed that many people had come down to meet them. It was exciting to watch them. And Larry Cook was in the crowd, but it didn't seem as if he wanted them to see him. He never looked toward the Aldens once. Is that the captain? Asked Benny. Yes, you can tell by his uniform. After the crowd had gone, Grandfather went up to the captain and said, Good day, sir. I am James Alden. Are you indeed? Said the captain. I'm glad to meet you at last. These are my grandchildren. I wonder if they could go aboard, said Mr. Alden. Why, certainly, said the young man, smiling. My name is Snow. I'll have an officer show them around. I don't want to take up any of your time, said Mr. Alden. Oh, no, said the captain. I have 3 days' leave. I live just over in Connolly. Connolly? Said Benny. That's where we are staying. in a lighthouse." "What an adventure that must be," said Captain Snow, "living in a lighthouse. Well, here is an officer. He will show you over the Tahiti." The officer showed them everything. They looked in the boiler room, the swimming pool, the dining room, the cabins. Everything was much nicer than the Sea Star had been that had taken them to Blue Bay. "Have you a big kitchen?" asked Violet. "Kitchen? Oh yes. We call it a galley. We feed hundreds of people. It takes a lot of pots and pans, dishes, ranges, an enormous refrigerator to do that. Come this way and you'll see." The refrigerator was interesting because it was as big as a small room. There were 2 men in it, putting things on the many shelves. "Could we go in too?" asked Benny. "Sure," said the officer, smiling. "Plenty of room, but rather cold. You won't want to stay in there long." "Brrr! No, I don't," said Benny. He went out just as quickly as he had come in. "You've got enough meat for a meat market, I should think." "We have enough for many markets," said the officer. When they had seen the whole ship, the young Aldens were ready to go home for supper. They thanked the officer 4 times over. Jessie said, "If Captain Snow lives in Connolly, I wonder which house he lives in." "If he is there for 3 days, we'll find out," said Henry. "We'll ask Mr. Hall. He will know." When Benny started to climb up for bed that night, he shouted, "Henry, I am the dumbest thing in the world." "Why are you dumb?" Henry shouted back. "Because I saw 2 or 3 long white bags in that refrigerator, just the kind that you get plankton in. I never said a word about it." "Yes, old boy, I'm dumb too, because I saw those bags and I just didn't pay any attention. I was thinking about that refrigerator that we could walk into." "I saw them too," said Jessie. "Aren't we all dumb? We could have asked the officer what he had them for." Grandfather said, "Now just what are you talking about?" Benny called down the stairs, "Don't you remember, Grandfather? That's the way to get plankton. To drag a long bag through the South Seas." "Of course I remember. Captain Snow was getting plankton for Larry. I should say the whole family was quite stupid." "Dumb," Benny said. "All right, if you like that better, dumb," said Grandfather. Chapter 9. Who Needs a Friend? The Alden family did not stay dumb for long. Tuesday, Benny said, "Let's see if we can find out where Captain Snow lives." "Just step down to the store," said Henry, laughing. Everyone laughed. "Wait just a minute until I finish the breakfast dishes," said Jessie, "and we can all go." It was Grandfather who asked Mr. Hall, "Do you know who Captain Snow is, of the Tahiti?" "I'll say I know him," said Mr. Hall. "I've known him ever since he was a boy. He's brother to the cook boy's mother." "Aha!" said Jessie. "Aha!" said Benny. "That explains a lot of things." Mr. Hall leaned on the counter. "Larry always goes over to see his uncle when the Tahiti comes in. His uncle gives him something every time, but nobody has ever found out what it is." "Maybe he gets it in a covered pail," said Benny, looking at Mr. Hall. "How did you know that?" asked Mr. Hall. "I saw him come home late one night, and he had a pail," said Benny. "Sometimes his uncle gives him a box," said Mr. Hall, "and sometimes a glass can. What do you suppose is in those things?" "We think we know," said Henry. "It's seaweed or plankton." And what's plankton, young feller?" "It doesn't grow around here, close to the shore," said Violet. "It grows in the deep sea," said Henry. In some places, the deep sea is full of it." "And what is it?" asked Mr. Hall. "It's what whales eat," said Benny. "It's plants and tiny fish and eggs and stuff you can't see without a microscope. But whales live on it." "The whale takes a big mouthful and swallows the plankton and strains out the water with his mouth." "Fishes eat it too," Henry added. "It's something like the way land animals feed on growing plants and smaller animals." "Plankton tastes awful," said Benny. "They say there's enough plankton in the deep sea to feed the world." "You don't say," said Mr. Hall. "Too bad it doesn't taste good. But what I want to know is what the cook boy wants for it." "We think he studies it and experiments with it," said Henry. "He's a smart boy, all right," said Mr. Hall. "Maybe Captain Snow would know." "Where does he live?" asked Henry. "Way up the street," said Mr. Hall. "Do you know where they're fixing the driveway?" "Yes, that's where we got our cement," said Jessie. Mr. Hall said, "There's a white house near the corner, and that's Captain Snow's. He lives with his mother." Benny said, "But most of the time he's out at sea." "Yes," said Mr. Hall, "most of the time." Then Watch began to wag his tail. He went to the door. A tall man came in and said, "Well, hello, dog. You're a good watchdog. Your name ought to be Watch." "It is!" cried everybody. "You're Captain Snow of the Tahiti," said Benny. "We were just coming down to see you." "Well, good," said Captain Snow. "You are the Aldens who went over my ship. Just give me some crackers and 5 pounds of sugar, Mr. Hall. Then I'll go right home." "Do you have to go home?" asked Benny. "Well, no, I'm not in a hurry. I'm on leave from ship just now." "Can you come sit on our rocks for a while?" asked Henry. "Right over there," he pointed. "Well, certainly," said Captain Snow. "I'll leave the crackers and get them on my way home." All this time he had his hand on Watch's head. "Watch likes you," said Violet. "I like dogs," said Captain Snow. "Let's go," said Benny. "We have 5 chairs and a table made of rocks." "Well, I guess I'll sit on the table," said the captain. "No, Henry's chair will fit you just fine," Jessie said. They soon were sitting on the rocks, talking. "You see that little house?" said Jessie, pointing to the little white house. "It's a summer kitchen for the lighthouse," Henry added. "Mr. Cook, Larry's father, owns it now. That's what Mr. Hall told us." "I see that it's empty," said the captain. "But it isn't empty," said Benny. "That's where Larry does his experiments. At least, we think so. He stays up most of the night. We don't know how he gets in. He can't have a key." "I always wondered where he worked," said the captain. "He doesn't tell me much, but I know he's trying to study by himself." "He wants to go to college this fall," said Jessie. "Everyone in town knows that," said the captain, laughing. "His father didn't catch on that Larry was so smart, and let him write letters to 2 colleges. "Did they want him?" asked Benny. "Yes, they both wanted him," said the captain. "They wanted a young man who has tried to carry on experiments in science by himself." Then Grandfather said, "I think he can get the work he wants at Henry's college. I might talk to a teacher about him there." Both colleges he wrote to wanted him. "He chose Adams," said the captain. "That's Henry's very college," shouted Benny. "What do you know about that?" said Henry. "If he went there, you could take care of him, Henry," said Benny. Henry laughed. "He won't need anybody to take care of him," he said. "But you could be his friend," said Violet. "He'll need a friend," said Captain Snow. "So far, his father has said no." "But why?" said Benny. "And why does Larry have to hide his work?" Captain Snow said, Well, I'll tell you that. Tom Cook is a selfish man with a quick temper, but I think he really does love Larry. He doesn't show it much, said Benny. No, that's the trouble with them both, agreed the captain. I think Larry is afraid his father would spoil his experiments if he knew about them. Larry cooked a wonderful supper, said Violet. We heard his father was proud of him. He made $500 for the streetlights. Captain Snow got up. He said, Well, I'll try to help him any way I can. I know how interested he is in science, and he seems to have found some good friends. After a minute, Henry said, Now the thing is to make Larry really friendly. How? Asked Jessie. Violet said, He is a little friendlier now, but that's because we helped him with the supper. What could we do, Grandfather? Asked Jessie. Something that would give him a really good time. Wait till morning, said Mr. Alden. Something may come up. And something did come up, and it was very different from anything that they had thought of. Chapter 10. Hints and Plans. The next morning, Jessie looked at Violet. What in the world is the matter with you? She asked. Mosquitoes, said Violet. Her face was red and puffed. Does your face hurt? Asked Jessie. I would hardly know you. We'll have to do something. I can hardly open my mouth, said Violet. I heard the mosquitoes, said Jessie. Look at my arm. The boys came down to breakfast. Hello, hello, said Benny. What happened to you, Violet? You look fat in the face. Mosquito bites, said Jessie. I had some too, said Mr. Alden. The wind has changed. Now it comes off the land. That always means mosquitoes. Henry said slowly, We have 5 windows. We have a screen door, but no screens on the windows, said Benny. I have an idea. Let's put screen cloth on the windows and get Larry to help us. And what about poor Violet? Asked Mr. Alden. Mr. Hall will have something for her bites, said Jessie. I hope he has screen cloth too. Violet could hardly eat. Henry said, I've finished breakfast. I'll run over to the store. Soon he came back with a great many things. He had something for Violet's face, a roll of screen cloth, a big box of tacks, and 2 small hammers. Jessie covered Violet's face with white stuff from Mr. Hall's. You don't need to help, Violet, said Benny. You can't even see the tacks. The next thing is to find Larry, said Jessie. Now, Benny, don't say anything about seeing him out in his father's boat. And don't ask him about what he does in the summer kitchen. He'll tell us when he's ready. Benny said, Oh, Jessie, I'm not that dumb. The Aldens walked up and down the street and looked at Larry's house. Mrs. Cook was out in the yard. Where's Larry? Asked Henry. I don't know. He's out. They could see that the sea cook was in. At last they went down to the wharf. There was Larry, reading a book. Hi, Larry, shouted Benny. Will you come and help us? What doin'? Asked Larry, shutting his book. And where is the other sister? Oh, you wouldn't even know her, said Benny. She is all mosquito bites. One eye is all shut. Jessie said, We want to put screens on 5 windows. Well, you don't need me, said Larry. Count us, said Benny. We have 5 windows and 4 people. Larry laughed. He got up, put his book under his arm, and they all walked down the street. Larry looked at the high windows. Then he looked at the screen cloth. "You can't put this on from the outside," he said. "No," said Benny. "We're going to put it on from the inside. We'll show you. We have done it before." "Well, I'd like to see how you do it," said Larry. Then Violet came out. "I'm very sorry about your face," said Larry. Then he began to cut screen cloth. Grandfather sat out on the rocks. He laughed to himself. Everyone was tapping or cutting. Grandfather could hear them talking. Once he heard Larry laugh. Then he got up quietly and went to the store. Grandfather said to Mr. Hall, "Do you think Larry Cook would like steak?" "Steak?" said Mr. Hall. "I don't think he's ever had much." "We'll try it then," said Grandfather. 5 pounds of steak should be enough." "Potato chips?" said Mr. Hall. "Pickles," said Grandfather. "How about a pie?" said Mr. Hall. "I'll need rolls and 2 pies," said Grandfather. "Make them cherry." Mr. Hall put all the food in a big bag. Grandfather went quietly back to the rocks. He could hear that the pounding had stopped. He found 2 pieces of old iron. He hit them together. It sounded like a bell. Grandfather looked up and saw Benny at his window. "Is that a dinner bell, Grandfather?" shouted Benny. "Come down and see," said Grandfather. Laughing, they all ran to the rocks. Grandfather showed them what he had bought. "We'll need a fire for the steak," said Larry. "Right," said Henry. "Here's our fireplace. We can use our grill." Everyone began to gather dry wood, but it was Larry who built the fire. The Aldens noticed that Larry never looked toward the summer kitchen. He did not know that they already knew a great deal about something that interested him very much. "I forgot you were a cook," said Benny. "How do you like your steak?" asked Larry. "Well done?" "No, he likes it burned up," said Henry. "He won't get any burned up steak from me," said Larry. "I want mine very rare, my boy," said Mr. Alden. "I know," said Larry. "Rare, but not raw." "Good," said Mr. Alden. "I shall enjoy this meal." They could hardly wait for the fire to burn down, but Larry would not put the steaks on. At last, the fire was just right. Larry counted 2 rare, 3 medium, and Benny's well done. "That means I'll have to wait till last," said Benny. Jessie put butter on the rolls. Mr. Alden's steak was done first. Larry took his own off and moved the rest to the hot part of the fire. Soon everyone was eating a steak sandwich. "Poor Grandfather," said Benny. "No coffee." "I don't need coffee today," said Grandfather. "Just give me a pickle." When they had picked up after lunch, Larry began to think he should go home. He said, "I had a fine time." He looked at Violet and smiled. "I hope you'll have no mosquitoes." "Thank you for helping us," said Violet. "Come again soon." "Maybe I will," said Larry. After he had gone, Jessie said, "I think we are really friends with Larry now. Don't you, Grandfather?" "Yes," said Mr. Alden. "You did exactly right. You gave him something interesting to do. Then you all work together. That's the best way to make friends." "Well," said Benny, "I wish we'd get to be such good friends that Larry would tell us about his work. Maybe he thinks he can sell that stuff and get rich." "I think he's more interested in the science," said Henry, "but that's just a guess." Then they all sat down at the beautiful blue sea. Violet said, "It never seems to rain here. Every single day it's been sunny. I wonder why." "Yes," said Mr. Alden. So far, it's been sunny for 3 weeks. But you will find it isn't always that way. In fact, I feel a storm coming up now." "I don't," said Benny. "There isn't a cloud in the sky." "Maybe not today," said Grandfather, "but soon. It is lucky we have a tight place like the lighthouse to stay in. We'll see some big waves." Chapter 11. A Wild Storm. When the Aldens had shut all the windows and looked out at the sea, they changed their mind about the rain. This was no little rain. This was a storm. The sky became very dark. There was thunder. The rain fell in sheets. The wind made a terrible noise around the lighthouse. "You do know about the weather, Grandfather," said Benny. "You said a storm was coming, and boy, here is a storm." "There goes a telephone pole," shouted Henry. "No one can telephone out of this town tonight." "I hope no one is out in a boat," said Violet. "The waves would tip it over." The waves dashed up against the lighthouse. They even ran down the road and covered it with water. The storm grew worse. Lightning made the whole beach light. Thunder sounded so loud over the water. "I don't care for this at all," said Violet. "It seems dangerous." "It is dangerous," said Grandfather quietly. "I surely hope no one is out in a boat." The storm did not stop. It grew even worse. The waves covered the whole wide beach. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. "Who in the world is that?" shouted Benny. "I hate to open the door. The rain will pour in." But Henry opened the door. It was Mr. Cook. "Have you seen my son?" he cried. "Where is my son?" "Come in, quick," said Henry. "We don't know where your son is. We haven't seen him all day." "Oh no," cried the man. "My wife told me to look in the little house first, but he wasn't there. He must have taken my boat. He's out in my boat. What shall I do? He will tip over. Nobody could handle a boat in this storm." Henry said, "Is there any Coast Guard around here?" "In Ashland?" Tom Cook cried. "They haven't time to get here." "We'll see about that," said Henry. He dragged on his raincoat and went to the door. "Where are you going?" asked Grandfather sharply. "I'm going for the Coast Guard. The telephone's out. We can't do a thing alone." Mr. Alden opened his mouth. Then he shut it again. He knew Henry had to go. Henry was backing the car around. "Get in!" he cried to Mr. Cook. "Quick!" And off he drove through the water that covered the road, splashing it as high as he went. After Henry and Mr. Cook had gone, Mr. Alden was very quiet. At last Violet said, "Henry will make it. He always does." "I hope you're right, child," said Mr. Alden. "I am worried. If Larry is out in the open sea in this, I don't think he could ever land." "Maybe he knows the weather too," said Jessie. "Maybe he started out for home before the storm came." "How awful that the light in this lighthouse is gone," said Benny. "If we could only light that, he could see his way better." "A reflector is left," said Jessie. "Maybe a small light would show up a little." Everyone had a flashlight that would stand up. Benny carried them all to his room at the top and set them around. The reflector did show a little light through the storm. By this time, they heard voices outside. The neighbors had come to the lighthouse to find out what was happening with the cook boy. They all knew his father's boat was gone. "Come in, everybody," said Jessie. Everyone was dripping with water. "My brother has gone for the Coast Guard. They will go out from Ashland and look for Larry." Then Jessie and Violet saw Mrs. Cook. She looked pale, but she smiled at the girls. The neighbors were wonderful. They had seen the storm like this before. A woman told Jessie to heat a lot of water and make coffee for the Coast Guard men. She helped herself. The men who had come went out on the beach to see if they could see anything. They stood in the waves up to their knees, but soon the water was up to their waists. They went back to the rock seats. They all had flashlights, and some had enormous field glasses. "The Coast Guard is quick," said Mrs. Cook. "They will be out to sea before your brother can get home." Jessie and Violet put their arms around her. The light at the top of the lighthouse showed a little through the heavy rain. It seemed like 10 years before a man shouted, "I see the Coast Guard boat! I see the Cook boat!" Henry and Tom drove up as the man spoke. "Oh, where?" begged Mr. Cook, getting out. "Show it to me." The man gave him glasses and told him which way to look. The boats were still right side up, but they often disappeared in the waves. Then Henry went down to the beach, too. "What will they do?" asked Henry. "They'll take the boy off and tie up his boat to the Coast Guard boat. I hope they will see our light and come here to our beach. The little boat can get through the waves here." Men looked through their glasses. "They're tying the boat on now. They must have the boy. If I can ever get my son back, he can have anything he wants," cried Tom Cook. "Anything at all. Anything in the world." "He's a smart boy, your Larry," said Henry. "Maybe you know that." "Yes, I know that. If he only comes back safe." "He will," said the fisherman. "The Coast Guard is coming fast this way. They wouldn't come now if they didn't have the boy aboard." "Oh, thank you," cried Mr. Cook. "Can you really see their boat?" "See for yourself." The fisherman gave him his glasses. The rain was still pouring down. It was still thundering. Everyone was soaking wet, but they could see the Coast Guard coming through the great waves. The Sea Cook, too, was tied on behind it. Mrs. Cook helped Jessie heat towels and blankets in front of the gas oven and make a bed with the blankets. "You'll have to use my bed for him," said Mr. Alden. Henry said, "You can have my bed, Grandfather, and I'll go up with Benny." "I don't think I'm going to need a bed," said Mr. Alden. "We'll all be ready for him when he comes," said Jessie. "Is there a doctor in this town?" asked Mr. Alden. "Oh, yes, indeed. Someone has gone for him. He is on his way." "Well, since there is no policeman," said Mr. Alden, "I thought that there wouldn't be any doctor either." "He is a very good doctor. His name is Dr. Phillips." "That big Coast Guard boat can't land here," said Henry to a man. "No, they will come to the beach in the smaller boat. The Coast Guard can run it through the waves. You'll see." Nearer and nearer came the big boat. The storm was still raging. When the boat was quite near, it stopped. 3 of the men got into the Sea Cook, too, and rowed it to the beach. Larry was lying in the boat. At last the boat reached shore. Strong men took hold of it and pulled it out of the sand. Henry helped. He looked at Larry. He was lying still with his eyes shut. "He's alive," the man said, "but he doesn't know anything yet. Put him in the bed and get a doctor. We saw your dim light." "We are all ready," said Henry. right in the lighthouse." "The lighthouse?" said the man. "Yes, we are living in there this summer. We have a bed all made up for him with hot blankets." Henry helped the men lift Larry out of the boat. He was soaked, and his hair was dripping wet. The men took him into the lighthouse. "We'll get him dry first," he said. Mrs. Cook rubbed Larry's hair with a hot towel. He was shivering, but did not open his eyes. Then Jessie went to the door to meet the doctor. The men got Larry's dripping clothes off and wrapped him in hot blankets. They laid him in grandfather's bed. Everyone came in with the doctor to see how Larry was. Suddenly Larry shouted, "Feed the world! Feed the whole world!" Henry looked at Jessie. The doctor said, "He has a high fever. He doesn't know what he is saying." Violet did not know what to say. She was thinking. Tom Cook was at Larry's side, begging him to open his eyes. "Larry, Larry," he kept saying. The doctor said, "I don't think you ought to talk to him. He will wake up himself when he is able. Remember, he has been out in that terrible storm. It is better for him to keep quiet now." Mr. Cook did not say another word, but he never moved from Larry's side. Jessie began to think, "Isn't it funny?" she thought. "We were sure Mr. Cook didn't like his own son, and we find he does. Maybe we'll find out that Larry likes his father too." When Larry could swallow, the doctor gave him some medicine. A little color came back to his face. "Have you any hot soup?" the doctor asked. "Soon he will be able to take it. It will do him good." "Yes, I have some canned soup," said Jessie. "That's all right. Don't put too much water in it. Give it to him strong." Larry's mother was the one to feed him the soup. His eyes opened and then shut. Then he opened. He seemed to be hungry. All this time, Benny had not said a single word. He just watched. Now he sat down quietly in a chair. Watch went over and sat beside him. The old dog did not bark once at all the strangers. He seemed to know that they were Jessie's friends, so they would be his friends too. Benny put his arm around the dog's neck, and together they sat there. Violet went over and put her arm around Benny. "It's been too exciting, Benny," she said. "You'll feel better soon. Suppose you have some hot soup too." Benny was thankful to eat the hot soup. He almost went to sleep eating it. "Better lie down," said Violet. "After all, it's almost midnight." Benny was soon fast asleep. All the rest stayed up and watched Larry. All at once he said, "Mother, I tried to feed the whole world." "What is he talking about?" asked Dr. Phillips. "Keep him quiet if you can. He will soon be asleep. Don't try to take him home yet." The kind neighbors began to say good night. "I'll come again early in the morning," said Dr. Phillips, going out last of all. Jessie and Violet went up to their room. Henry carried Benny upstairs to his bed without waking him. Mr. Alden and Watch sat quietly with Larry's father and mother. For the first time, when the clock struck 12 at midnight, Watch did not bark. Chapter 12. The Secret is Out. The next day was beautiful. The storm had gone. Everyone got up early and went downstairs to see how Larry was. Dr. Phillips came early too. Mr. and Mrs. Cook were still there, sitting by the bed. "How is the boy?" asked Mr. Allen. "He is very much better," said Dr. Phillips, "but he still doesn't know what he's talking about." "Oh?" said Benny. "I think he does." "And I do too," said Henry. "What is he saying?" "Oh, that same old thing about feeding the world. Will you tell me what that makes sense?" "We'll show you," said Henry, "if it's all right with Larry. That is better than telling. Mr. Cook and Grandfather, you can come with the doctor too." "I don't need to come," said Mrs. Cook, smiling. "I know all about it. I used to take Larry his supper every night. Here's a key. Your dog always barked, and I was sure you'd come out and question me. I'll stay with Larry now." "Eat anything you see," said Larry, almost smiling. Then the Aldens led the men down the path to the little white house. Mr. Cook said, "I never guessed a thing." Benny said, "Larry comes to work here every night. We thought we smelled fish cooking." They all went in. "What is this?" said Dr. Phillips, picking up a little cake. "Well," said Henry, "I rather think it is a cake made of seaweed. It was baked in that pan." "Try it," said Benny. "Larry said we could." The doctor broke off a piece of the cake and tried it. "How is it?" asked Benny. "Not too bad. Not too good," said the doctor. "But why is Larry using seaweed?" asked Mr. Cook. "There's a great deal of it," said Henry. "Anyone can get it free. It could be made into food people could eat. It would help feed the world." The doctor said slowly, "The Japanese use it, but they like it. They make cakes and candy and puddings." "That is exactly right," said Henry. "If we liked it, we could have all we want, just by sending out boats after it." Mr. Cook looked at Henry and said, "So that is what my boy was doing, trying to make seaweed taste good. He did know what he was talking about all the time." "Then Larry is well, if he is talking and making sense," said Dr. Phillips. "Only he is still weak. He can get up when he feels able." Dr. Phillips went on his way, and the rest went back to Larry. He was sitting up, eating his breakfast. "Tell us, Larry, what were you trying to do?" said Grandfather, sitting down beside the bed. "Oh, it is so interesting," cried Larry. "I had to do my experiments with seaweed because plankton wouldn't keep. Uncle Rich Snow always brought me some plankton from the South Seas. He had a refrigerator." "We've been in that refrigerator," said Benny, laughing. "We saw your white bags of plankton, but we didn't know what they were at the time. I like to look at plankton under my microscope, but I do wish I had a large microscope. The plankton would be so beautiful. It's all colors and so many different kinds, and so small you can't see it without the use of a microscope." "We saw some plankton when we went to Blue Bay," said Henry. "Then you know. If we could only make it good to eat, it would feed the world." "Tell us about your experiments," said Mr. Alden. "Well, I've tried a good many things. Of course, I don't have much to work with. I mixed the jelly with the seaweed to make flour and sugar and cakes and fried them. They were not very good. Next time I was going to put in flavoring." "Good work," said Mr. Alden. "You have done well all alone. Now you need help." Then Grandfather went on talking to Mr. Cook. "If you will let Larry go to Adams College, I will help you pay for it." "Oh no," said Mr. Cook. "That isn't it. I have enough money. Captain Snow would have given us more money too. I just made up my mind that he couldn't go. I hated to give in. You see, I never had a chance for much schooling. I've done all right. I couldn't see why Larry needed to go to college. A waste of money, I thought." Mr. Cook stopped. Then he added, "I guess I'm quick to lose my temper and slow to change my mind." "I was like that too," said Benny. "I used to howl my head off." Mr. Cook laughed. He said, "And you think I am howling now? All right, he can go." Jessie looked at Larry. His eyes were shining. He had forgotten his breakfast. Mr. Alden said, "Let's all sit down and talk about this. This is wonderful of you, Mr. Cook. You see, I know Adams College. Henry goes there. They have a teacher who could help Larry on this very work. He will work with Larry, I am sure." Larry sat up straight. Watch went over and put his paw on the bed and wagged his tail. "That settles it!" shouted Benny. "Now Larry is one of the family." Chapter 13. A Final Surprise. Grandfather sat forward in his chair. "Another thing," he said. "We ought to go home soon." "Oh, why?" asked Benny. Mr. Alden laughed. "I have to work, for one thing." Jessie said, "I suppose you do." Henry said, "I must get ready for college, too." "I shall miss you all," said Larry. "You won't miss Henry," said Benny. "You'll see him every day at college." "I can go back to my house this morning," said Larry. "I feel all right, only weak." "I'll take you in the station wagon," said Henry. "And Mr. and Mrs. Cook, too." Suddenly, Mrs. Cook said, "Wait! I have an idea. You must all come to our house for supper." Mr. Alden shook his head. "Better not, Mrs. Cook," he said. "You'll have enough to do taking care of Larry without cooking a supper for 8. But we'd enjoy it all right." "I won't need a thing," said Larry. "I'll just lie down every once in a while." Mrs. Cook smiled and said, "Larry isn't the only one in the family who can cook. I do it too, and I like it." The 4 young Aldens were looking at Grandfather, hoping he would change his mind. "Very well," he said. "We'd love to come, if you really feel that way." "Good," said Mrs. Cook. "Come about 5 and see our yard. We'll eat at 6. Benny said, "I won't eat much lunch, Mrs. Cook, so I can eat a lot of supper. I bet you are just a good cooker, just as good as Larry." They all laughed at Benny. "Really," he said. "I mean it. I'll eat hardly any lunch at all." "I can't imagine it," said Henry. "I'll get dressed," said Larry, "and go along home." "You'll have to wear some of my clothes," said Henry. "Yours aren't dry yet." After the Cook family had gone, Benny said, "Now I wonder what Mrs. Cook will have for supper. It won't be frankfurters, I'm sure." "It won't be chowder," said Henry, smiling. "It won't be hamburgers," Benny went on. "Now, Benny," said Violet, "don't be talking about things to eat all morning. You make me hungry already." "What shall I do then?" "Well, you might put up the clothesline, tie it between the houses. We can get Larry's things dry in the sun." "Shoes and all?" asked Benny. "Yeah, tie the strings together and hang them over the line. When the job was done, Benny came in again. "What shall I do now?" he asked. "Oh, Benny," cried Jessie, "go down to the beach and sit and watch the water. We're very busy." Benny went slowly down to the beach. In a minute he shouted, "Oh, come quick! Millions of shells! Heaps and piles of shells! Bushels of shells!" Everyone ran. They swept the shells and shoveled the shells into anything that would hold them. They set them on the rock table. As Mr. Alden worked, he said, "I think we're going to make it." These shells were washed up by the storm. They came from far away. The water came in steadily. At last, almost every shell was saved. "We won!" cried Benny. "Now the tide can come in." "And now we'll have some fun," said Mr. Alden. "See if you can find an empty pan." "Here's a kettle," said Violet. "Just the thing, child," said Mr. Alden. "I think it will be full." "What are you going to do?" asked Henry. "I'm going to pick over the shells and save the interesting ones," said Grandfather. The children sat down to watch. At once Mr. Alden cried, "Here's a beautiful red scallop shell, and this black and white one came from far away. These shells never grow around here. That is why some of them are broken." Quickly Mr. Alden picked over the shells. He never stopped once. "My," said Benny, "you know a lot about shells." "I ought to," said Mr. Alden. "I have studied them all my life. Isn't this shell beautiful?" "Say," cried Benny, "doesn't it look something like an olive? And speaking of olives, I wonder if Mrs. Cook will have pickles. If she has hamburger, she will have to have pickles." "Now, Benny," said Henry, "stop talking about food. You know you are not hungry yet." All day long, Benny was waiting for 5 o'clock to come. At 4:45, he said, "Don't you think we should go now? It will take us 15 minutes to walk to Mrs. Cook's." Henry said, "Oh, so we're going to walk there, are we?" "Henry and I will ride," said Mr. Alden. "Wait 5 minutes more, Benny," said Henry. "You can help me wipe off the car, then we'll go." They reached the Cook's house at exactly 5 o'clock. Mrs. Cook came around the house from the backyard. "You're just in time," she said. "Mr. Cook wants to show you our yard." The Aldens were very much surprised when they saw the yard. It was beautiful. There were big bushes of flowers and beds filled with flowers. The grass was very green. In the middle was an enormous fireplace and a long table. "She does have pickles," whispered Benny to Jessie. There were chairs around the table. "We might as well eat," said Mrs. Cook. "We are all here." "That's good," said Benny. "I've been hungry all day." "We'll fill you up," said Mr. Cook. Larry sat down in a long chair. He looked weak, but he said he felt fine. "You can help me, Henry," said Mrs. Cook. Henry came back from the house with a pan of rolls. They were light and brown. They smelled delicious. Benny whispered to Jessie, "I still wonder what will go with the rolls." He did not have to wait long. Mrs. Cook gave Henry 2 holders. He lifted an enormous pan off the fire. The fire was almost out. "Ho, ho, chicken legs?" yelled Benny. "I can have a lot of those." "How many can you eat?" asked Mrs. Cook. "Well, 4 anyway," said Benny. "My friend Mike, he can eat 8. "You can have 8 too if you want," said Mrs. Cook, laughing. But when Benny saw the watermelon, he ate only 4 chicken legs. Mr. Alden said, "Mrs. Cook, these are delicious. You can certainly cook as well as Larry." Suddenly, Larry looked toward the street. A big car drove up, quietly and stopped. "We have company, Mother," Larry said, pointing to the car. "No," shouted Benny. "It's our company. It's Mr. Carter. He's getting out now." And it was John Carter, one of the men who worked for Grandfather. He had a large black box. He carried it over to where everyone waited. With a smile, he said, "I felt lonesome, and after I read your letters, I wanted to see Larry." "Well, this is Larry," said Benny. "He is lying down in that long chair because he was almost drowned in that storm we had." "I know," nodded Mr. Carter. "Your grandfather telephoned me. He shook hands and said hello to everybody." All this time, Larry looked at the box. He knew what was in it, but he could not believe it might be for him. Mr. Carter was saying, "Here you are, Larry. From what Mr. Alden told me, I guess you need a bigger microscope." "Mine has just been lying around. I haven't used it for years now that I'm not with the FBI. You may keep it." Benny carried the box over to Larry for him to open. Larry's hand shook so that Benny said, "Maybe your hands are shaking because you almost drowned." "No," said Larry, and his voice shook too. "It's because I'm so glad I have a good microscope. I can never thank you enough, Mr. Carter, never." "Don't try," said Mr. Carter, and he and the Aldens were glad to see how pleased Larry was. "Well, Carter," said Grandfather, "you didn't come way up here just to give Larry that microscope. You must have had some other reason." Mr. Carter laughed and said, "Well, so I did. I thought you might need help packing, and I brought you a letter from Adams College. It is from Dr. William Steer." Grandfather read the letter at once. "Good," he said. "Excellent. Larry, this Dr. Steer wants a boy like you very much." "Why, sir?" asked Larry. "Because he is doing the same work that you are. He is experimenting with seaweed and plankton for food." "Wonderful," said Larry. "I'd like to work with him." "He says something else," said Grandfather. "He says that we ought to spend more money getting food from the sea instead of bothering with space." "I think so too," said Larry. "I suppose we ought to do both, but I'm more interested in the sea. Think how deep it is. Miles and miles. And all full of food, if we can only get to it." Mr. Cook put his hand on his son's shoulder. He said, "I can see that you and Dr. Steer will get along fine." John Carter had already eaten, but he had a large piece of watermelon just the same. When the time came to say goodbye to the Cooks, Henry said, "We will go back to our real home tomorrow. We're sorry to go." "And we're sorry to see you leave," Mrs. Cook said. "But I'll see you soon," Larry called, "at college." The next day, Mr. Carter was a great help. He worked with the girls on packing, and he took some of the bags in his own car. Benny ran to Mr. Hall's store to give him back the lighthouse keys. When he came back, the family was ready to go. "I want to ride with Mr. Carter," said Benny. "Very well," said Grandfather. "No reason not to, if Mr. Carter wants you." Mr. Carter laughed and said he wanted company. The girls and Grandfather rode with Henry. They drove past Mr. Hall to wave and say goodbye, then past the Cooks before leaving Conley. At last home again, as they told Mrs. McGregor, the housekeeper, all of their adventures. Mr. Carter told how well the young people had solved the mystery. "I couldn't have done better myself," he said. "Oh, yes, you could," said Jessie. "You used to be an FBI man." "No, really, I couldn't," said Mr. Carter. "Larry would trust young people more than he would trust a man. I'm sure of that. You were wonderful with Larry." "That's right, John," said Grandfather, nodding. "They were." The bags were unpacked, and Henry took the empty car around to the garage. But the family did not sit around very long, doing nothing. Everyone was busy in what was left of the summer. One day, Grandfather and Henry went to a store to get Henry clothes for the fall. But Grandfather bought 2 jackets, not just one. Henry tried them on and said they were just right. One was gray, and the other was brown. The brown one went in a special box to be mailed to Larry Cook. Henry wrote a letter saying it was the kind of jacket all the boys wore at Adams. Then the time came when Henry and Larry went to Adams College. Grandfather went too. He took the boys into the dean's office and told him who Larry was. Larry sat down near the door. It was half open. Suddenly, Larry stood up, looking very much surprised. A tall man came in. He looked at Larry once, then he looked again. Then he held out his hand and said, "Well, well, clam chowder!" Larry cried, "Baked beans!" The two shook hands. "What in the world are you two talking about?" asked Mr. Alden. "Do you know Larry?" "Yes," said the tall stranger. "I know he makes the best clam chowder and baked beans that I ever ate." The dean laughed. He said, "Well, that makes my work a lot easier. Larry, this is Dr. Steer." "Dr. Steer?" cried Larry. "The one I'm going to be working for?" "The very one," said the dean. "Sit down, Dr. Steer. This is Mr. Alden, and this is Henry Alden. They brought Larry along to meet you." Dr. Steer looked at Larry. He said, "I have seen your papers that you did all alone. You are already doing college work. I will be glad to help you because our work may be important for the whole world." "I hope so," said Larry. "It seems important to me." Mr. Alden looked at his watch. "I must go," he said. "You two boys find your rooms, and Henry's friends, and good luck with you both." Mr. Alden shook hands with Larry. He said, "You have a wonderful teacher, my boy. I know you will do well." Mr. Alden left, and then Dr. Steer left. The boys went to find their rooms, and the dean sat alone. "I like a boy like that Larry," he thought, "and he has a fine friend in Henry Alden." About a month later, Grandfather got a wonderful letter from Henry. "Read it out loud," said Jessie. This is what Mr. Alden read. "Dear Grandfather and all, Larry and I are so excited. Dr. Steer likes Larry's work. He has asked him to stay here at the college all summer and work with him, but Larry thinks he shouldn't do that. He wants to be with his father in the summer. So what do you think? Dr. Steer says he will come to the little white house in Conley and work with Larry. They will fix up the little house and put on a new room. Dr. Steer says he will call it Cook's Experiments. Isn't that wonderful? He thinks someday Larry will be famous. I have to tell you that Larry wears his white lab coat all the time. He almost never wears his jacket. The boys like him, and he is very smart. Love to everybody, Henry." "What wonderful news," said Jessie. "Aren't we glad we made friends with Larry Cook?" "I am very much pleased with you," said Grandfather. "You young people changed a cross young bear into a fine young man." "I think Benny did most of that," said Jessie. "Well, I don't," said Benny. "I think we all did it together. And you, Grandfather, and Captain Snow, and Watch." "Don't forget Mr. Hall," said Jessie. "We'll never forget Mr. Hall," said Violet. "No, sir," said Benny. "Mr. Hall knows absolutely everything." Thank you so much for joining us as we read through this whole book, The Boxcar Children. I want to encourage you to like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and see lots of other cool books that we're going through and different teachings in the Bible. I just want to thank you so much. Take care.